Hello everybody, good evening. Thanks Alice for the invitation. I will give you an overview of what the Bouwmeester's role has been in Brussels since the last 10 years. So that means, because I guess you're all architects, there will be images of projects, but there will be also a lot on governance, on methods of competition and so on. So be warned. First about Brussels. So Brussels is many things, and so I think this lack of a clear identity, that's probably the most important thing about Brussels. That's in fact especially the thing that is very attractive to me. So it's the capital of Belgium, it's the capital of Europe, it's the capital of NATO. On the other hand, it's just a medium-sized European city, 1,250,000 inhabitants. You could think about Brussels in this map as a point, as one city, but in fact, as you know, it makes part of this kind of urban sprawl in the northwestern part of Europe. Antwerp is only 50 kilometers, and in between Brussels and Antwerp you have another city, Mechelen, with its proper identity. So even since medieval times in Flanders and Belgium, there has been this very, very dense network of cities. When I was working as a Bouwmeester in Antwerp, I didn't move to Antwerp. I kept living in Brussels and I commuted every day. So this is the kind of the use of the urban sprawl of the cityscape that is the daily use in Belgium. So one city, but part of an urban sprawl network. It's a complicated country. My regular joke is, if you will understand what I will explain now, then that means I have badly explained it. Because it's supposed to be so difficult that you cannot understand it in one time. So we have two languages, you think, in Belgium, so Dutch and French, but there is also a German-speaking minority. But we have three regions in Belgium. So Brussels is bilingual, on the northern part, Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, and the southern part, French-speaking part. And so the bilingual part of Belgium is surrounded by Flanders. And then you have language communities with another level of government, and they do not coincide with these regions. And then within Brussels, I'm working for Brussels Capital Region, but Brussels Capital Region is in fact a collection of 19 municipalities, of which one is called Brussels. And all of these municipalities are working, have a kind of political autonomy, and they can decide on smaller building permits and so on. So that means in my position, I don't have to negotiate with just one government, but also with 19 mayors everywhere in Brussels. So this is multiplicity in another dimension, also on the dimension of the political institutions. And that leads to this kind of situations. So you could ask yourself why, in God's name, the one that was cleaning the snow on the road stopped over there. That's because it's the limit between two municipalities. So we are really coping with that kind of issues in Brussels. So that was the last thing to laugh about Brussels. Now it's going to be serious. Brussels is very diverse, but also very multiplicity, also on the level of income and employment. There is a huge division between, in your view, on the left side, on the western part of Brussels, which is more poor, and where there is more unemployment. And while the right part, the eastern part, is also where the greener areas are, and the greener neighborhoods is much more rich. So there is very much this kind of social rupture in Brussels. And that brings me to the composition of the population. It's a bit strange to tell you about socio-ethnic social and ethnic diversity in Brussels here in London, because of course London is a very diverse city as well. But you should know that in fact on the continent, Brussels, and in fact in Europe in general, is the most diverse city of Europe. That means 1/3 of the people living in Brussels are not Belgians. Half of them are rich, they're working for the European institutions, for instance, and half of them are very poor because they are new immigrants. And then 66, but perhaps it's better to say 30, only 1/3 of the people living in Brussels is like me, is the child of 2 Belgian parents. So the majority, the large majority, it's 66 here, but it's going up to 70% of the people living in Brussels have not been born in Belgium or have at least one parent that has not been born in Belgium. So this is a city of strangers. This is a city of people who are not real Brusselaars because they've been living there for generations and generations. They are from Brussels because they've chosen to come and to live in Brussels. So this is extremely important, and in fact, in my view, not enough reflected in the way that we organize urban planning, for instance. And then there is this kind of typical image. You might know, perhaps you've been in Brussels, then you know it's not a cute city. It's not about harmony in our city. It's not Bruges, certainly. It's not Vienna. It's about of a clash of scales, it's a clash of architectural styles, clash of programs. And that is due to bad politics in the 20th century, that's clear. So there has been a lot demolished for international institutions, but also just by private developers. It's all Brussels people themselves who've been damaging the city. On the other hand, the city is there, and we won't reconstruct it. And I like very much to present this kind of image of the city. In fact, as a city that is, it's a bit hineininterpretering, as a city that is reflecting that kind of social diversity of the city. Perhaps it's a good thing that the most diverse city of Europe doesn't look homogeneous. This cityscape suits us. It's really us. There's a lot of things possible here. And that's also why today many architects and urban planners are fascinated by Brussels, because there is this kind of absence of a canon. There is no Leitkultur. There are only minorities in Brussels. And that's why probably this is really the image of the future European city. So it's not Vienna, and it's not this kind of mental image that we have of the perfect city. It's this heterogeneous city that is the European city of the future. That's the narrative that I've been developing as a Bouwmeester during 10 years in order to present also this cityscape not as a problem, but as an opportunity. Let's talk now about this Bouwmeester position. So it's a tradition now in Belgium. On the other hand, a short tradition. So in Flanders in around 2000, and then also in the city of Antwerp, the job was created and was inspired by what is still existing in the Netherlands, the Rijksbouwmeester. So there have been Bouwmeesters before in Belgium in the 19th century, but they were the city architects in the sense, the architect who built the buildings of the city, the public buildings. So today, of course, the job is not anymore like that. It's not me who's making the architecture of Brussels Capital Region. It was introduced in Flanders and in Antwerp around 2000. Then the latecomer Brussels was 10 years later, more or less. Then in the French-speaking part of Belgium in Charleroi. In Brussels, the title is bilingual, Bouwmeester, Maître Architect. But in Charleroi, I think it's funny. They only kept the Flemish thing. They pronounce it as bouwmeester in a French way. So it has become, for me, also a French word and an English word. Then in Ghent, and then we're still waiting for the Walloon government to introduce this kind of position. They've been hesitating a long time, and I think it won't happen in the tenure of the current government either. So, what is the bouwmeester or maître architect not? So, I'm not in the hierarchy of the institutions in Brussels, so I'm not the head of the planning administration. I'm also not the one that is dealing only with the projects of the city. The bouwmeester is not deciding on permits. So in that sense, it's not like a city architect that exists in other cities or in German cities, for instance. It's another role. On the other hand, the bouwmeester is not just a consultant and also not a politician, even if working very closely with politicians. So the BMA, or the bouwmeester maître architect, is a government-appointed official, however working in an independent position. This could look like a contradiction. I will come back on that later because it's crucial to, I think, the success of the job. And the mission is to improve the design quality of urban development projects in Brussels. So architecture, but also urban planning, public space, landscape, and so on. So the task is quite wide. Appointed by the government, but neutral and working in an independent position. So neutral in the sense of on the level of political parties, but also independent in the sense of having not being, I don't have a kind of general director of the administration above me. So the bouwmeester is directly accountable to the government, but working very closely with all of the administrations. So there is a kind of liberty of speech. So the bouwmeester is not supposed to support everything what the government decides. And from time to time, I can make use of this kind of liberty. On the other hand, if I would do that every day, and especially in the newspaper, then after a while, you would lose your impact. They will try to put you aside. So you have to find the right equilibrium between being loyal and being critical. So it's this kind of finding an equilibrium, hybrid position, that is typical for the bouwmeester. The bouwmeester is in and out of the system. In the system, because of link to the government and to the administration, but also out of the system, and very accessible for architects and developers and so on. So that means you can also work as a kind of bridge between the world of practice, the real world, and the world of policy and politicians, where decision-making happens. I think this is important, because that means we can work also in a horizontal way, in a transversal way. And transversality today is very important for quality in urban development. We have wicked problems, climate change effects, dealing with that kind of thing. You just cannot solve it within one pillar, within one silo of the administration. And because the bouwmeester is not working for someone, we can work with everyone. So this kind of independent position is really crucial for the job. Sometimes I'm saying we because there is also a team of 15 people. I've been lucky to expand, I've been able to expand the team, and also a lot of young people, very much motivated people, who can bring together with me things into motion. So the bouwmeester leaves every 5 years. I've had quite a bit of an exception. From now on, it will be only one term of 5 years, but the team remains. So the team is also responsible for continuity. Together, there is here something like more than 100 years of experience. The team and the bouwmeester is financed by the region, so we are working for free, but we work for instance, when we work for private developers or for other public authorities. And then we never work alone. I don't work alone. There are these people, but we are also working together with a lot of other actors in Brussels. Of course, the other public authorities of the Brussels capital region, also of the other institutional levels, so that means below the municipalities, but also above the national state and the European institutions. We work together with professional organizations of architects and planners and with universities. We work together with civil society, both ends. So I'm quite proud in some way that I have the cell phone number of the largest developer in Brussels, but also of the most Marxist activist. And that exactly is also due to that independent role that you can have contacts on both sides. We work with cultural institutions, European institutions, and that's it. So there's a huge cloud of complexity in Brussels that you have to deal with. So what do we do? There are something like 4 main jobs, 4 pillars. Label BMA, I will explain you. A more classical thing that is happening in many cities, design review linked to the planning permits application, research by design, and organizing competitions. Organizing competitions is the main part of the job, something like 50 or 60% of the time. And I think that's one of the strengths, I think, in Belgium. There's a very, very good competition culture. So we organize competitions for public clients and also for private clients, for developers. And we launch more or less 1 competition per week is the average, so 50 competitions per year. If you think of competitions, you might think of this kind of exceptional programs like a passerelle for the footbridge for the Belgian Parliament, typical subject for a competition. Okay. This is one by Affes Kersten Geers and David van Zeveren. But we also organize competitions for very ordinary programs. So something like 6 apartments on an empty plot that was empty. So that was empty because private developers don't want to build there. It's too difficult because you had 2 streets that with a different statute, and so you have to connect them. So you can't make a standard plan. And so this is social housing apartments that are at the same time repairing the urban fabric. So many of the competitions, this one is won by Versa Architecten, are also on this kind of smaller level and healing the city, in fact. Larger ones, project in Nova City, project by Bogdan van Broek and DDS Plus, which is about combining productive activities and housing on top of that. I will come back on that as well. Public space. Here, when you enter by train in Brussels, you can see this new square in the Marolle below the Palais de Justice. And also private development. Here, one of the first private competitions that I've organized in Brussels on Tour et Taxi, a huge residential development, huge for Brussels scale, designed by Surges and Bates, Noah Architecten, and AWG. So what is so special about competitions in Belgium? So they're always in 2 stages. We never organize open competitions. That means open competitions where all of you, architects, are asked to make a project, and then there are something like 50 proposals. You aren't paid for them, and the developer or the public client is just choosing. So we think this is a waste of energy, this is not fair, this is unhealthy for the profession. So that's why it's always in 2 stages. In the first stage, there's the program should be as clear as possible. There's always a public call. There are some access criteria. I'll come back on that. And then we select something like 3 or 5 architects or designers to go to the second stage. In the second stage, we ask them to develop a proposal and they are paid for that. Let's run through that. So a good competition starts with a clear program. If the client is not able to ask a clear question, the client cannot expect a clear answer. So the responsibility of the client in the very beginning of the competition procedure is quite important. So we push them to have all information available from the beginning, so that when the architects apply, that they know on what they are, for what they are applying, that they have the full information. And then in the program, we try to push them to put some ambitions forward, to say in this competition, it's about this issue. So it's not each time about everything. It's not each time about all aspects of sustainability. It's, for instance, about one aspect, that is the reuse of materials. That was the case here in this project for of both universities in Brussels, for a new university building in a former military barracks. And the central issue of this competition was reuse of materials, local reuse within the same building. So it was won by BC and EVR with a project that was really focusing on that. So I think that helps to make good competitions, that the client has a clear ambition and that is also limited in the scope of the ambition, so that you as an architect can be interested in it or not, because the topic interests you or not in the competition. That gives better proposals also. So there were a lot of materials reused. Here the marble of the windowsills was reused in a kind of new terrazzo floor, but there's also bio-based materials in the building and so on. So it's very much about reducing carbon emissions here. Low access conditions. So in Belgium, before the system of the bouwmeesters, you had this kind of typical competitions for a swimming pool, and you had to have built 3 swimming pools before. Otherwise, you couldn't apply. And even the quality of these references was not evaluated. So it was perfectly possible that the public procurement system allowed a bad architect to build a bad 4th swimming pool. In our case, we want to have refreshment. So we want to give also younger officers the opportunity to apply, and perhaps to be, even if they have never built a swimming pool, to build their first swimming pool, because you have to kind of break this kind of closed circuit. So we never ask, for instance, for turnover, so that's never a criterion. We mostly ask only 3 references. Only 1 reference is on the budget, and then it's only on 1/3 or half of the budget. So if you want to apply for a building of 5 million euros, you have to have built, for instance, a building of 2 million, 2.5 million euros before, not necessarily also a building of 5 million euros, so that you can move up. And then we also ask for a motivation note. So that's what we did, for instance, for this big competition for the Canal Centre Pompidou, the new the pole or museum in Brussels of contemporary art. In this case, it is a 150 million euro project, and we only asked for 1 reference of 50 million euros. And then it was not necessary to have built a museum before, but it was a bit larger. That's what we do always with these kind of categories. We make them a bit larger. You should have built a public cultural program before. And then 1 reference was free. And as a candidate, you had to explain why that reference was relevant for the job. So, and that helps, that kind of explanation by the architect themselves on the level of relevance of the reference. And that's also something that we ask in the motivation note. So we ask for instance, 1 or 2 pages, and to explain why you're interested in this job. That helps. There you can really see who knows what it is about here, who perhaps knows the site. So we don't ask for a proposal, but we want to check if did you read the brief well, and have you a kind of sensibility for this kind of issue, for this kind of brief? So what is giving you, why is it attractive for you to compete here? That helps very much also to choose for architects that are really motivated. You can easily recognize this kind of motivation notes that could function also for another building in another city, that are made in a kind of automatic way in mostly larger offices. For smaller projects, where the fee is below 143,000 euros, so that's European legislation on public procurement, we don't ask any references at all. So that we only ask for 1 A4 with intentions. You only have 1 week to apply. So it's a light and lean procedure on both sides. And that opens a lot of opportunities for young offices. So in the same building, Canal, we organized a competition for the interior architecture for the bookshop and the culture market and the bar and the brasserie. And it was won by a very, very, very young team of 4 women. They were collaborating for the first time. They even didn't have a name for their office. And so this part of the competitions really helps young architects to have their first public project. It's really opening up the market and bringing new blood into the architecture projects of the city. Second stage, we ask for a proposal. We remunerate for the proposal. There is a kind of minimum that's of 500 euros per A3. This is the weakness, the current weakness of the system in Belgium, because this is not enough. We know that architects take much more time for competition proposals, and that they are not remunerated enough. So we try to have the clients paying more, which is not easy. And so that's why we try to reduce the design efforts for the proposal bit. So it's not always necessary to have a full sketch design to solve all of the apartments in a building. It's enough, perhaps, if you only show that you can solve apartments, the layout of an apartment, and that you should show with 3 or 4 apartments, for instance, a standard one, a corner one, and a difficult one that you can choose yourself, that you have the capacity to do that without making full plans and entire plans that are a lot of work. For instance, in this competition for the Royal Belge, a former office building in a nice part of Brussels, which is now a mixed-use building, competition won by Caruso, St. John and Bovenbouw, and it's a competition with a private developer. So for that building, we only asked a proposal for the ground floor, because every architect can make hotel rooms and offices in the upper floors. But the ground floor, that was the key issue of the building, because it was like a kind of palace in the park, and you had to open it up so that it becomes publicly accessible. And so we asked the architects only to work on those 2 to 3 floors. It functioned very well as a competition system. The last things is on the presentation. So you've understood competitions in Belgium are never anonymous, because if they would be anonymous, you can't have exchange. And I think it's very much important that architects can explain their project to the jury. in many cases, there are possibilities of misunderstanding if you're just reading, for instance, the proposals. And you should be able to ask questions, and the architect should defend and explain the project. For public space projects, we are now experimenting with opening up the jury. So there are not just professionals in the jury, but also a citizens panel. Something like 10 people that have been selected from the neighborhood, people living there, people having a shop there, shopkeepers, very diverse. They make part of the jury, but they only have one vote, which is fine, because they are forced to negotiate among themselves and to find a kind of balance in the project. So they're not just defending their own position. And so they have the experience of the jury among themselves. That means that you have to find a consensus and an equilibrium between a lot of claims. So it's very helpful also for them to understand that making jury decisions is not just an easy thing, that you have to have a lot of attention in too many aspects. And we hope that it will also help to guarantee support for the project afterwards. There were too many examples of competition procedures that were, in fact, without any participation. And then at the end, the winning project is presented, and then it goes wrong because there is no support, people don't have the ambition, the feeling that they've been able to share the experience. And then there is a lot of transparency. So after each competition, we publish on the website a fact sheet, a kind of summary of the winning proposals, and also an explanation why the winner was the winner in the eyes of the jury. But since 2023, we also publish the full entries of all of the entries for the competition. And that's very useful because of transparency, so you can check yourself if the jury has chosen the right one, but also because it helps younger architects to understand how you make a good presentation, how you build up an argumentation, how do you present a project. So I think the Vlaams Bouwmeester has been doing that longer than the Brussels Bouwmeester, and I think this is part of the explanation why young officers in Belgium have been made progress that easily. That was competitions. Another pillar of our work is research by design. So I hate it when discussions on quality of new urban planning projects or architecture projects, that they are just discussed with words or with Excel documents. So I think it's important that the tool of the architect, the drawing, a map, a rendering, an image, is present in the discussion as well. And so that's why there are some people in my team, 2 to 4 people, who are making drawings. Not because we want to build ourselves, but to feed the debate on quality. And that has been, I think, very successful the last years. Some of this, much in fact of this research by design is reactive. So we have a not so interesting developer with a not so interesting architect who's making a proposal, who wants to demolish an existing building. And then we try to convince that developer and the architect to do it in another way, with keeping more or less the same density, but for instance, pushing the building backward because we want, along the canal, we want to avoid a kind of clean, continuous facade. We want this, in fact, this kind of irregularity. And finally, they agreed. So it's not great architecture, but it's more about urban planning here and about urban form, in fact. Sometimes it's more proactive. So these are the guys of a Brussels beer project, so a local craft brewery. They were looking to to find a site in Brussels to build a new brewery. It was a competition afterwards that was won by Office Kersten Geers David van Zeveren. And so we helped them to look for a site, to convince the municipality that it could work, to push the neighbor site to make it a bit more compact, so to create some place for it. So this is a drawing, and that should be happening also on the side of the public authority. And the last one is more prospective. This is working on the 20th century belt of Brussels, because a lot of urban renewal is in the 19th century belt, but I'm convinced that in the coming years we will need to renovate a lot of housing also in the 20th century belt. And so how could we change that kind of morphology of Brussels? Third one is design review. I will be short. So in Brussels, every planning application above 5,000 square meters should be reviewed by the bouwmeester in order before being introduced as a planning application. So that's an important leverage also to push private developers to come and see us in the beginning. Because in fact, it's much more easy to have impact on quality if you are there in the beginning. If it's at the end of the trajectory of a planning application, then everyone is angry then if things have to change. While in the beginning, there is still more possibilities. And the last one, the label BMA, it's something that the Vlaams Bouwmeester has been introducing, I think, more than 10 years ago. So normally in this kind of public procurement or for urban planning studies, it's the client, public authority, who asks you to do something, to make a building with that brief, or to make a study on that subject. With the label, we turn it the other way around. So once a year, we launch a call for subjects. So on what do you think that we should develop a policy? On which subjects would you like to work because you think that they are relevant for urban policy in Brussels? And so each year we select something like 3 proposals. We give them a bit of money, 7,500 euros, so just enough to develop the idea, to free up some time to work on their idea. But moreover, we lend them our address book and our contact list. So we bring those people from the profession, from the architecture field or the urban planning field, but also people from civil society. We bring them into contact with politicians, with administrations, and so on, in the hope that their idea would climb up and finally end up as new policy in Brussels. This is what we call soft power. So bouwmeester is not about hard power. It's not about deciding. It's not about imposing. It's all of the time about convincing, pushing, helping, challenging. I think this is very important in urban governance. You need regulations and so on to avoid the worst. But if you want to go for excellence or for something better, then you need other kind of tools. You need this kind of soft power tools. Might be a bouwmeester. In some cities you have a kind of a planning commission that is very active. In other cities you have a lot of temporary use that is really helping forward new ideas. There are a lot of possibilities, but you need this kind of extra layer in urban governance. And then, just to, I don't know, I have some more time? Yeah, okay. So why are we doing all this? So these are 4 tools that are deployed in the bouwmeester system. But of course, we use them to put issues on the political agenda. So this is more also about the content. And so these are, for instance, topics that we have been promoting the last years in Brussels. I will talk a bit more about the first two, productive city and adaptive reuse. Productive city starts with the fact that space, places for makers in the city, small industry, dirty activities in the city, there are more and more, in all the European cities, they have been pushed out of the city because we've been replacing them by apartments, by offices, and so on. I think you know the issue very well in London, because here in London there was Mark Brearley, who has been really inspiring for us in Brussels as well, because insisting on this fact that we should reserve some space for productive industry within the city itself. In Brussels, this has been very much the case in the canal area. So the canal area is the canal going from Charleroi, where the coal mines were, to the port of Antwerp in the north of Belgium, and so going through Brussels. So this is the main urban regeneration area in Brussels. The canal area is also a line of social rupture in Brussels. This is a map made by Architecture Work from Brussels. And in red is where the people with a low qualified diploma live. What I call here in this map the makers. The map is a bit exaggerating, but it's making very clear that on the other side of the canal, you have a lot of blue. Blue is not blue colors, but white colors. It's the people where the office districts are. It's where the people with high qualified diplomas are living. So the canal is also a social rupture breaking line in Brussels between poor and rich, between more immigrants, North African immigrants, and white people. One of the first things was to put this issue on the political agenda. So this was the canal something like 5 or 10 years ago. In no European city you had this kind of situation, with still industrial activities very close to the historical center of the city. This is 20 minutes walking of the Grand Place. So Brussels was late, because in other cities this would have been already waterfront development, apartments, bars, shops, and so on. Vibrant urban life, mixed urban quarters, but lacking one program, that is productive activity, that was there. In Brussels it didn't happen yet because of bad politics. On the other hand, I consider that as a gift, because it enabled us to do it in Brussels in another way. So in 2012, the Brussels government decided to regenerate the canal area. And there was a plan, more like a vision, in fact, not really a plan, made by the French urban planner Alexandre Chemetov, with 3 main objectives. The first 2 ones, they're regular ones. So we have a demographic boom in Brussels, so we need a lot of space for new housing and also public amenities. Okay, we will do a lot of it along the canal, but because there is a lot of brownfield and empty land. Second thing is about this social rupture. So the canal should become a new urban centrality that brings together the districts on both sides. That is orthodox discourse in urban planning. But the third one was very special, especially in those times. That is, okay, we will do this, but we will keep some industry there, and we will even reinforce urban economic activity. Because this is also the area where there is a lot of unemployment. This is the area where you could go for local employment. And these kind of jobs in productive activity and making things, it has become fashionable. After some years of yoga teaching, people want to do something with their hands. And we have a lot of people making jewels in Brussels or doing something with chocolate. And then in London, you have an elegant woman holding a hammer. And so this kind of hipster makers' jobs, they're welcome, but it's not enough. We also need places for this kind of ordinary jobs, dirty jobs. Foundational economy, what they say. The jobs that are necessary for the city to, so that the city keeps turning. There are a lot of jobs in circular economy, local food production. And there are jobs, perhaps of next economy, that I do not know, but I do know that the economy in the future is more and more becoming small scale, more fair, cleaner on the level of ecology or environment. And that means more easy to integrate within the urban fabric. And so what a pity would it be if in 10 years, 20 years, there is a lot of this kind of new economy and it's not possible to have them in the city because we, the urban planners and the architects, have been pushing them out and keeping no space for them. So first things first, I consider it as a bouwmeester, as my task to guarantee that there is this kind of physical space for that kind of makers industry in the city. And so that has been happening in the first sense with spatial planning. I'm, I don't know, in Kooleminar, I'm a cold lover of spatial planning because it's abstract and it's about zoning plans and so on. It's not about the real thing making the city. On the other hand, this has been crucial in Brussels. So in some areas, the zoning has been changed and the regulation has been imposing on developers who want to build housing over there. If you want to build housing, you have to keep something like 10% of the square meters of the total surface area for productive activities. And so that has been forcing mixed-use projects with productive activity within the city. So it has been very powerful. We've been doing research by design, but I'll skip that to convince clients that in fact, it's because you can decide this on the level of spatial planning, but that doesn't mean that there is a kind of architectural solution to make this kind of mixed use. So we had to do some research by design in order to show to clients that things could look like that in the Mazui neighborhood, and if you combine it that way, then the nuisances are under control. So it's feasible. And that kind of step was necessary before going to the next step, that is organizing competitions. And so here you see again Brussels Beer Project by Office Kersen Geersdaven van Zeveren. It was such a pleasure for me as a bouwmeester to organize competitions for these kind of programs. And so not for schools and kindergartens and cultural programs and so on, but for dirty programs. And it was really also very much a pleasure that many, many architects were interested, and many good architects were interested in doing these kind of programs. And so there's a whole series of architectural competitions. This one is by Xavier de Geiter, mixed-use project for a private developer with housing on top, a level of not underground parking, but above ground, and then spaces for small and medium enterprises on the ground floor. It's nearly finished now. And I think another one by Bouwkunst. So this is on the former slaughterhouse site in Brussels, where there is still a lot of food processing industry, meat processing industry, but also other food, not manufacturing, but go on. On the ground floor, you have this kind of spaces for food processing industry with a lot of cooling installations, refrigerators, Then you have 2 levels of parking because each weekend there is a huge food market over there and a lot of people come by car, so they need parking building now because before the parking was just in open air. And then on top of that, because we're lacking public swimming pools, open air swimming pools in Brussels, there is a proposal to make an open air swimming pool that will be heated with the heat losses of the refrigerators. So in that sense, it's also a circular system. So for me, this is really about Brussels. This is about complexity. So we can't, because of the political situation in Belgium, we can't go with this kind of programs. We can't just decide to have a new open-air swimming pool in Flanders, outside of the borders of Brussels. So these borders of the linguistic separation in Belgium, they are very, sometimes they are a problem, surely, but you could say for urban planners and for the architecture in the city, they are in fact a gift because they push us to find complex solutions and to have interesting proposals. We don't have land enough, so we have to superpose it. And so many architects in Brussels are very much trained in looking for complexity instead of avoiding complexity. Embracing complexity has been the slogan. And this project really tells it. If you want to know more, there's a publication on all these projects of Productive City on the website of BMA. And the last one, which was the main topic, in fact, in my second term as Bouwmeester, is on adaptive reuse. Brussels had this really bad habit of demolishing a lot of buildings, so especially in the office sector. So when an office building was outdated, because, for instance, the ceiling height has now to be different, or the floors have to be larger, so continuous floors, the building was demolished and a new office building was constructed. This is, of course, we know now, crazy about carbon emissions. There is a lot of energy, embodied energy that is lost. There's a lot of nuisances for these demolition sites in Brussels, nuisances for the neighborhood, a lot of trucks going through Brussels. And then you need, again, new energy and new emissions in order to construct a new building. So for us, it was clear this had to change. So there is, in Brussels, a good tradition on reuse of materials, thanks to the pioneering work of Rotor. But the next step, and the necessary next step, is not just the cherry picking of reusing the nice materials of a building that is salvaged from a building that was going to be demolished, but the reuse of the building itself, especially of the concrete structure. And so we've been insisting a lot on that the last years. So this is a forerunner, Zinneke public project, public clients. Rotor was very much involved. We organized a competition here that was not about making a proposal, but each of the teams had to do a workshop of one afternoon with the people of Zinneke and with Rotor, and then that was the way that the winning team was selected. So in this building, you have a lot of building elements and materials that are reused, and you also have that kind of art back facade. And that's a beautiful anecdote, because this facade is a result of the first planning permit in Brussels with a dotted line. So the architects weren't able to tell how the windows would be placed and what kind of windows and what shape of windows. Because in reuse, you depend sometimes of, okay, somewhere there's a batch of windows available, that's the moment to have them. And so there was a lot of negotiation with the Department of Planning Permits to allow that in the planning application documents there would be a dotted line saying, here there will be a window. It was only possible because it was the back facade. And so, of course, the architects made use of it, abuse of it. They selected a traditional window which was curved on the upper part, of course, and they decided to put it the other way around because The planning permit department couldn't say anything anymore. The planning permit was okay. So, but it proves how if you want to help reuse, the entire system has to change. Also on the public authority side. The filières, the contractors have to work in another way. You have to find space for temporary storage of these kind of materials. So the entire building construction system has to change. Another example by Agua. So this is an office building that was empty, and it was decided to make a school in it very quickly, because there's really need for new schools. And Agua won the competition because they said they would reuse all of these kind of partition walls on the inside. And so they've made new walls with the existing partition elements, but also with new ones. And so you can recognize the difference. It's a new kind of aesthetic that is also being generated here. And what is changing here in the role of the architect is that there is a lot of inventory to do. If you have to work with what is there, le déjà là, the first thing that you have to do is to know what is there. And so we learned, for instance, that for these kind of projects, perhaps you have to give a bit of extra fee because there is a lot of preparatory work to do. And the last one, this is what is called the Récy Park by 51N4E. Now it's finished. Here it was not yet finished. So it's where you go for your trash, and you throw it away for recycling. Now they will be covered in Brussels because when it's raining, people don't go to the Récy Park, so they want to offer a better space. 51N4E won the competition because for this recycling installation, they proposed to work with recycled building elements. So the beams, and the beams, they originate from a manege, so where horses are kept in Wallonia. They were transported to Brussels, and they were reused on that site. These are pioneering projects, also motivated public clients who can be convinced to take some extra time to do some experiments, perhaps sometimes to pay a bit more. I think this is interesting, but on the other hand, if we really want to cut carbon emissions, we just can't work with a small amount of exemplary projects. We should, in fact, mainstream and generalize. It should be systemic. We need systemic change. And that's why we started using the tool of the design review to force developers to keep the buildings. So in Belgium, there is a lot of office vacancy now after Corona. European Commission will cut its needs in floor space with something like 25%. And we see now that there's an entire wave of these kind of buildings that are going to be transformed. Rather banal, something postmodern, sometimes fascinating office buildings from the last quarter of the 20th century. And in most cases, they are now transformed into housing. Another example how a crisis is in fact also a gift. And also in a systematic way, we use the tool of the design review to convince or to force, slightly hard power here, the developers to keep the concrete structure. Another example, and so that's the mainstreaming aspect. Another example is this is the European Quarter. European Commission sold something like 300,000 square meters of offices to the Belgian state, who will redevelop them. And then probably the European Commission will rent part of it again. But in this operation, 30% of the floor office space will be transformed into housing. So again, this is an interesting opportunity to bring in this neighborhood, which is really monofunctional housing, monofunctional offices, finally some housing, so that it becomes a mixed neighborhood, and so then that becomes again a truly urban neighborhoods. In this 310,000 square meters real estate program, in fact, it's called City Forward. It's driven by a private developer. The choice was made to make 25% to 30% housing, to keep all existing structures and as much materials as possible, and also to do all of these projects with competitions with the Bouwmeester. So it's a nice example of how impact has been growing. The final goal, in fact, would be something that is not very sexy. So if you want to go really for systemic change, then it should be into the regulations. And then you have the most general impact. And then you are beyond this kind of pioneering stage or exemplary projects phase and so on. And so there was a proposal for the reform of the Brussels Building Code last year. It was not approved because in the last run there was some political discussion, and then it was elections, and now we are still waiting for the next government in Brussels. So I hope it will be approved in the future. But the idea was to turn the automatism in the other way. So today, if you want to go for a planning application and you want to demolish a building, it's not put into question. So your planning application is about a new building. In the future, you will have to prove and motivate that there is no alternative, that you cannot do something else than demolishing the entire building. And so that will, if that would be approved, that would be really changing everything, because then the system is, then you really have systemic change. Of course, there will be exceptions, and of course, there will be a kind of analysis also on other levels. For instance, if you want to, some of these buildings are blocking the view or situated on a bad place, or if you want, for instance, to regenerate soil, and so that you have full soil and that you can plant trees. And so, of course, you have to demolish if you want to create public space. So it won't be a dogma. But I think it's important to change, in fact, in the most fundamental way, the automatic way of thinking here. So the final goal would be a new legislation. If you want to know more about reuse in Brussels, there is also a publication available on our website. That's it. Thank you.